I am absolutely overwhelmed that you all came and give me some time this afternoon to talk about a topic that I adore, which is ethics. So, I've had the great joy today to talk to students, administrators, faculty, my dear colleague Bill, a couple of other people we've met along the way. And everyone wants to talk to me about ethics. So tell me, why are you here?
Supporting Bill in the program.
Supporting Bill in the program. I love it. Why are you here?
I-Lead event.
Okay, an I-Lead event. Who gets college credit or extra bonus points for being here? I think it's wonderful. That's a perfectly good reason to be here. So there's a fabulous poet, an American poet, Muriel Rukeyser. She passed away in, I think, the 1990s, wrote about her experiences in the 20th century. And the following phrase is engraved on the sidewalk in front of the New York Public Library. The world is made up of stories, not of atoms. And so what I'll talk about now are some stories about ethics, about doing ethics in an imperfect world, the world that we have, and the world that, like you, is always on the state of becoming. And so as we take that voyage, I'll share some stories, we'll have some Q&A, and I've got to admit I'm a really bad lecturer. So I get to stop every so often and ask you all questions. And because you're kind, good, respectful, diplomatic, people of high integrity, say yes?
Yes.
You'll respond when I ask you something, right? Yes. Okay. So, one of the first things that people ask me is, how do you teach ethics? So I am an adjunct lecturer at Brandeis University and the University of Maryland, both in schools of public policy, because when you have a career like me working for international organizations, that's the only place they'll put you. The law schools don't want you at all. So right now I teach 18 Chinese exchange students at Maryland who will get a double master's, a master's of public affairs, MPA from Maryland, and an MPA from their home university in Guangdong province in China. So we start every class with news and weather. Weather means, who's ill and did you get your homework done. News, what did you read in the newspaper in the last week that raises an ethical question? Okay, who's got a question or a topic that you read in the newspaper in the last week that you think raises an ethical question? Raise those hands. See if you picked up the same thing that my students picked up. What is it? Big topic. All the press, the last 3 weeks. Anybody?
Guilty until proven innocent.
Guilty until proven innocent, meaning, what was it? What's the story? Yes! So my students, my Chinese students who have no experience with the three-legged stool that creates the US government, executive, legislative, judicial, right? 3 parts of the government, they balance out. You want all 3 legs to be even, otherwise you tip over, right? It's a pretty simple imagery, but it's our form of government. My Chinese students said, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, should he be on a court? Should he be a judge? So we had a long conversation about the Supreme Court and nomination and confirmation and president and liberal and conservative. So we got all that understood. And I said, step back, pretend you were on the Senate Judiciary Committee. We explained what that was. And you have to vote, do you think Judge Kavanaugh should have a position for life as a Supreme Court justice? How do you think my 18 students voted? 51 to 49 to not confirm. But isn't that interesting that they mirror exactly the debate that we're having right now? So to step back farther, what are the ethical issues? Now these are 18 students, they're ages 24, they're about the same age as all of you if I average everybody out. And they don't do anything individually, right? You go as clumps. So I've got to do a lot of group work. So I said, this clump and this clump and this clump. Buzz among yourselves and tell me, what are the ethical issues? So think a moment while I find my slide clicker, what you think the ethical issues are, and I'll share with you what they found. So what are the ethical questions? First of all, what are the boundaries between public and private life? If you have a position of high importance, do you even have a private life any longer? Are you now just public property? The second one was, what should be, I love this, the moral, the ethical temperament of a Supreme Court judge? What makes a good judge? What are, I'll get my philosophers in, Aristotelian characteristics, the character traits that we say are important for a judge? Now, what could be the long-term impact of this process, the nominations process, on the reputation going forward of the judiciary? What hath we wrought? To whom do we owe compassion? Who are the victims for whom we owe some kind of duty to improve how you were treated? And finally, I love this one. How many of you expect ever to go for a job interview? Okay, Mr. Rutland, maybe you don't have to raise your hand, but the rest of us probably know the job interview. The nomination of a Supreme Court justice in this system is a job interview. Now, is it one that I would wish on any of you? Let's have a conversation offline. I'll give you my card. We'll have a conversation. But how much weight do we give adverse information that is old? Is there a moratorium as we go back in history? I go back in history a lot longer than all of you are alive. I have a whole lot of history I'd like someone not to explore. You haven't lived long enough to have quite so many things you don't want anyone to know about. But is there a moratorium against which we have to say, enough already? Now, these are students who we say they come from a different country, a different culture, right? Are they getting what we're getting? And I think the answer is yes. So these are the kind of moral questions that thinking people ask about things that are controversial. Now, but then you say, but don't ethical values really change by culture? Different cultures, different people, different nations think differently. Who believes that? It's a perfectly strong, important belief. I'll show you now a photo. I wasn't on vacation. This is Addis Ababa. This is the National Museum of Ethiopia. Around 2014, my colleague Kim Schwan-Yun and I were there to do some ethics work when I worked at the UN. This is the placard on the front door of the museum where Lucy, the most ancient hominid bones, lie. Lucy is about 4.3 million years old. You know what the good news is? She was almost as tall as me. I thought that was very cool. But look at the values, right? What are the values? Integrity, loyalty, transparency, confidentiality, honesty, serving the public interest, impartiality, respecting the law. And this is Ethiopia. And notice we don't disagree with any of those values. Global values really are global values. It's how we prioritize them. So everyone wants to know, what was it like to work at the United Nations? Or as we say, the United by God Nations. Anyone have an idea of what this is? What are you looking at? I'll get out of the way of the camera.
The creation of the UN.
Yes, and how did you know that?
It says FDR 1943.
Yes, do you see in the middle? FDR 1943. I know there's a little, there it is. Those are the initials of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States during World War II. Tehran, Iran, November 30, 1943. This is a conference with Stalin, Mao, and I can't remember at this point who was the PM of Great Britain. It's gone from my brain. Anybody remember that? Is it Churchill? Okay, it's Churchill. And they're saying the League of Nations didn't work for lots of good and important reasons, but eventually this global war will be over. Unlike your experience where wars never end, my experience, and I look at World War II up through the Vietnam War as my wars. They shaped me and my family and the life that I have led. But FDR, Churchill, Stalin, and it's not Mao, I'm sorry, it's Chiang Kai-shek, are saying there is an after. What do we do? How do we organize the globe? How do we reach agreements to prevent the third global war of the 20th century? And he says, so FDR says, well, there'll probably be about 40 nations standing at the end of the war. There's got to be an executive, a secretariat to kind of mind the records and boil the coffee, and 4 police. They were assuming at this point that Russia, China, UK, and the US, the major allied powers, would be successful. This is before Normandy Beach, mind you. This is not a beautiful time in the war. This was an awfully grim winter of 43 to early 44. And they say, optimistically, let's have a new United Nations, a new entity that pulls together the existing nations. They have to be able to enforce, to police themselves, and have a voice for each nation that they can talk in a way that doesn't require the exchange of bullets. That's the beginning of the United Nations. Now, my favorite part of this is, well, P4, permanent 4. What do we know about those 4 countries? They are 4/5 of those countries who hold the veto power on the Security Council. Who's the 5th? France. So the question is, how does France get on the Security Council? This is FDR. Russia says, I'm not sure we want to play if China is here. So FDR says, we'll add France. And they all agreed. And that's how you get 5. It's as simple as that. So that's the beginning of the UN. And where's the UN going to be? Well, they had Geneva as the Palais des Nations, the home of the League of Nations. They didn't want to go back because it sounds too much like the same thing that wasn't successful. So Rockefeller, for $8.3 million, buys almost 30 acres on the east side. That's 42nd Street between that's the FDR right next to the East River. And then the street at the very bottom of the screen, that's First Avenue. How many of you have been to the UN headquarters? It's the most impressive place I've ever worked. So Rockefeller buys this property. It's abandoned. It's stockyards. It's train depot. It's filled with asbestos. It's not an environmentally pure piece of property. He gives it to the UN, and today, that's what it looks like if you're on the other side of the East River looking at the headquarters. It is a phenomenal place to visit, and it gives me chills to think we can work there. I'm a kid who grew up outside of St. Louis, Missouri. I never got a passport until my mid-30s. The farthest I had ever traveled from home was Washington, D.C., where I had a job. I never thought I would work there. And so if you think about where you are today, don't limit your sights, because a kid from the Midwest can work at the UN. But of course, my favorite photo is one that I took. This is from my bedroom window in New York. This is Tudor City. This is from my apartment looking at, and the far left side of the screen, I can see the edge of the 38-story building. That's UN headquarters. So, does everyone have between you a piece of paper and 2 pens? Can we find a piece of paper? I need you to get into groups of 2, 2 pens, a piece of paper. All right. All right, and you're sitting next to whoever you're sitting next to. If you've got extra pieces of paper, hand them out to people who didn't bring any paper. Do you need a piece of paper? You need a piece of paper. I don't have any extra paper. Who's got some extra paper? A piece of paper I can cut up into little small pieces. Can I have a scrap? Oh, good person. Thank you so much. You don't need a whole lot. All right. Okay, split it in half and pass it forward. Who else needs a piece? Split it in half and pass it forward. Yes, 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 yes. Do you have a mate to